It is the dog days of summer. People always say that. The summer's always hot. It's hot everywhere. I don't know why it's called the dog days, but Dr. Cindy Otto is an extraordinary woman and doctor, an advocate for dogs who have to be out in the heat. She does and has done for a really long time some extraordinary work as executive director of the Penn Vet Working Dog Center at the University of Pennsylvania Veterinary School. She's been on the show before. There's all kinds of studies she's done, which are groundbreaking and important and tell us many things about what dogs can and can't do. One of the things they can't do well is be out in 100-degree weather running around. Dr. Cindy, you did a study, and I thought you had to study how to cool a dog down, but because you knew how, because you're the man, so to speak, the woman. But you did a study and it gave you surprising results. So before we go backwards, and then we'll talk about heat stroke, how it happens, why it happens, how to not let it happen, what to do if it does. This study, you set it up because you're a researcher as well as a doctor in a way that would give you very clear answers about the dog's very hot, it's an emergency, and what do you do? So how did you decide what the elements of the study would be, what your choices were of what to do for the dog?
That's a great question, Tracy. And what we were looking at was what was known, or what was at least passed on, whether it was lore or actual science. And so we really looked at what people were doing in the field, what people were recommending, what was written in textbooks, and some of the other publications. There are a few publications that have looked at optimal ways to cool, and there's lots of products out there, there's lots of recommendations, and we wanted to test it in a very systematic way. We actually ended up doing two studies. The very first study was one where we looked at the common technique of what we would call partial body immersion. In other words, putting a dog in a baby pool, letting them stand or lie down in the pool to cool off. And we know that getting a dog fully wet like that and then letting the air move and evaporate that water is very effective. It's just challenging sometimes because we don't have access to that. But people are like, okay, just stop working and let them go rest in the shade. How effective is that? And then there's some recommendations: use alcohol on their foot pads because alcohol evaporates quickly. And so that we know that will help in cooling. But if we're trying to just put it on their foot pads, is that even enough to make a difference in the whole body? So we did that as our first study. And we found that the cooling in the pool was the most effective, but none of them were like dramatic. And then we wanted to think about, how do we do that if we're in the field, working as a search and rescue dog, working in Africa as a conservation dog, working, or even just out hiking someplace where there's not a pool that you can carry with you. So we looked at what we would call field cooling techniques, and those included limited amounts of water. And we talk about cooling if we're going to get them wet, where are the optimal places if we have limited amounts. And so we took towels and we got them wet and we put them around their neck, and we put towels under their armpits. And then we also use those chemical ice packs. So sometimes in your first aid kit, those get pretty cold. And we thought those are going to be pretty cool, literally, and put them under their collars around their neck so that they would cool. And then the last one we did was a fluke, where we had been working with some dogs trying to clear things out of their nose and their eyes. And so teaching them how to put their head in a bucket of water to rinse their eyes and their nose. And we're like, when I'm hot, I like to pour water on my head and it feels a lot better. Could this actually be something that could work? And could we teach dogs to do this so that they can help cool themselves? And so that's the backstory.
It's really interesting because there's so many elements to it that I'm sure will interest everyone. I had never heard of the alcohol and the paw pads. I have only been told that dogs do not sweat through their skin. That's not told to me. There's a fact of nature. You probably knew that before you ever went to vet school a long time ago. But their paw pads sweat, if you will. That's where they eliminate some heat, and their tongue panting. Those are the only two places. I would think alcohol would be counterintuitive, but as you say, it was in the lore. So,
and we're not big fans of the alcohol. The dogs find it aversive. It's flammable. It does cause some evaporative cooling, but it's just not the most effective we can do.
So standing in water would make sense if the paw pads are very hot and they're trying to expel some body heat. Seems like nature did not come up with the best cooling system for a dog. I'm just saying.
No, dogs really, they're really limited because
Yeah,
what we know is panting is how they cool. But panting is not effective when the temperature and the humidity get really high.
exactly. They're taking in hot, humid air. How can that doesn't seem appealing. I love the way that you were thinking. I was thinking of horses because those of us that have competitive horses, especially all my years in California, it's always hot. The horse is always hot. But the horse can sweat all over their body, from their ears to their tail, their belly, and everything. And we were told to put a cold hose, and maybe cold was wrong because that's something else you discovered. Ice cold, really cold, is not the right temperature for the dog.
We don't know that.
Well,
We
you
don't
said
know that.
70 degrees. You picked a kind of comfortable.
Yes, we picked 72 degrees, which is room temperature, but relative to 90 degrees, it's actually quite cold.
Yeah.
And we're continuing the study and we're actually looking at even colder water. And again, there's a lot of lore that you shouldn't use ice water, you shouldn't use cold water.
Right.
We don't know 100%, but certainly the human literature suggests that cold
Oh,
in a dangerous situation, ice cold water, rapid cooling, it's a life-threatening situation.
for human,
That's
to a
for
human.
humans, but and the physiology isn't that much different.
Right.
So we don't know. Again, the lore says you put them in cold, ice cold water, then all of the blood vessels around the outside shrink down and they can't get rid of heat. That is more theoretical than has been really documented. But what we're doing is looking at a more conservative approach. So cool water, 72 degrees, which is room temperature. We're also now looking in our current study at 59 degrees or 58 degrees, which is a strange number, but that's the temperature of water when it comes out of a hose. So that's ground temperature.
You see, this is why science matters. But with the horses, we were told to direct the hose at their groin area, their belly or their groin. And I thought that was an area of usefulness with dogs too. You said armpits, but I thought also the groin area. Is that not true?
Oh, absolutely. When we're cooling, and especially when we talk about total body immersion, it's the underside. It's thinner skin. It's got less hair. So we have that opportunity for the evaporative cooling to be more effective. But the other piece that's really thinking about focusing on is the head,
Yeah.
because what is damaged with high heat is your brain. All of your organs can be injured, but if your brain gets cooked, then that's when we get into heat stroke.
And that's when we get into dogs dying.
Exactly.
I think one of the things you
Exactly.
mentioned in the study, if this is the right statistic, is that half of the dogs suffering true emergency heat stroke can die or will
Oh,
die.
absolutely. And that is again based on the clinical literature of what people have seen when they come into the hospital with heat stroke, with all of the signs of heat stroke. And that's defined very specifically that they've already got damage to their organs, their brain is affected because they're not responding to their environment normally. So that's serious, the most serious component. We can have heat stress where we're just hot. We can have heat injury where we actually start to get some mild damage. Maybe the dog gets diarrhea. Maybe we've got some other things going on. And then it progresses on as more and more of the organs are affected and it gets more and more serious.
Which I don't think your average pet owner really considers when they have their dogs out in the heat. I know at some point I said to people, if you put the palm of your hand flat onto the surface you're walking your dog on, assuming it's asphalt, concrete, not the earth with some sort of vegetation or dirt, and it feels really hot to your hand, is that a true way of saying that's going to feel really hot to the dog's paw pad? And not be an advisable thing to do for other than a short pee and poo walk?
Yeah, absolutely. You can burn their pads. I
Yeah.
mean, we're like they have pads, they're like shoes. No, they get burnt
Yeah,
too, and they end up with blisters, and it's very painful. And yeah, so just walk barefoot with your dog, and then you'll know where they can
like
walk and
that.
where you
Yeah,
can
you
walk.
walk barefoot, see how you like it, kind of thing. Is saying, oh, the dog will be fine in the car. It's 90 out, but I've got the windows open. Yeah, okay. So why don't you sit in the car wearing a fur coat and a knitted hat and some gloves? You sit in there, see what that feels like to you. Sometimes we have to say to people, put yourself in your dog's paws because people imagine them having, I don't know, superhuman powers because they aren't human. The dunking, how you came up with that idea is really important for people to understand. You have trained and worked with the health of. And I think you've been involved, if I'm right, in the breeding of working dogs from their babyhood, their parents. When you talk about them having debris in their eyes and nose, people think, what are these, allergic dogs? No, these are dogs searching in debris of catastrophes for humans that they might find, either deceased or alive. Talk a little bit about those challenges to the people who do search and rescue, military people, police dogs.
Sure. And it's even true of hunting dogs. It's true of when
Yes.
dogs are running through the field. There's all sorts of debris. There's dust, there's grass-ons, there's all sorts of things that can get in dogs' eyes and noses. And so in a disaster setting, particularly when we think about some of our major disasters, 9/11, that the amount of dust and debris was just thick in the air, and the dogs didn't have any way to protect themselves from that. And keeping their nasal passages clean is, it was really, I wish we had realized that at the time. It would have even taken things, we were flushing their eyes, but that didn't begin to touch what we were able to do with having them dunk their head in a bucket of water. So really a very important part for keeping their nose clean. And if we're relying on these dogs to use their nose to find things, we don't want a lot of debris and dust and drying out of their nasal passages. So this can actually be helpful potentially for them for their work, as well as keeping it hydrated and keeping them cool.
All right, so as a breeder and a trainer and a medical doctor, how the heck do you teach a dog to go, sure, I'll put my head in a bucket? There might be some clownish dogs who think anything's funny, or maybe some extreme water dogs, Portuguese water dog, I don't know, maybe some labs. Like, oh yeah, that seems fun. But
Well,
most dogs,
it's actually not that hard. It's
really?
surprising how readily these dogs in general will do it. And
Really?
I learned this years ago when I was teaching tricks to dogs, and it was called go fishing. And it was just it was a silly pet trick. Now we know it's more than a silly pet trick. It can be a life-saving, medical technique,
Yeah.
to have our dogs do this. And the way we teach it, and we created a video so that people
Oh,
could have
nice.
access to that. It's on YouTube under the AVMA. It was published by the Journal of the American Veterinary Medical
Wow.
Association, freely accessible.
Cool.
And so what it is a very simple step-by-step process where you take a container, and it doesn't have to be anything special. I like a clear plastic container because I can watch what's happening, but it doesn't have to be. We take an empty container, nothing in it.
Okay.
We drop a treat in that
Got
container, and the
it.
dog goes in the container, puts his head in the container, and gets the treat. Wow, easy. They get comfortable around the container. They're not afraid of the container, and we then know it's not so high that they're going to push
Yes.
their neck up against
Yeah.
it to try to get to the bottom. Once they're comfortable with the container, we put just enough water on the bottom, that it'll cover up to just the edge of their nose. Drop
Okay.
the treat in, and they can see the treat. They can get the treat, and it's just under a little bit of water. It's almost like putting it in their water bowl.
Yeah.
Perfect. And then they like, treat, fantastic.
Yeah.
They get comfortable doing that. We do that a couple of times. We double the amount of water. Drop the treat in, let
No.
them go in. And what they learn to do very quickly is they start blowing bubbles out their nose as they put their head in the water, which is why the clear container is so fun, because you can
For
see
you.
blowing bubbles. And so then we progressively put more and more water in. Some dogs will do it for a treat. Some dogs will do it for a toy. And the treats, we have to be careful that they don't dissolve in the water, we want treats that sink in the
Right.
water. String cheese is pretty good. That's what my
That,
dog will do it
that's
for.
very cool. That's a good tip because I'm thinking dehydrated chicken will rehydrate in no time. Chicken soup. All right, so let's talk about brachycephalic dogs because they're not only the most at risk of heat stroke because their breathing problems, and sorry, Frenchie breeders, you're a naughty bunch. And the pugs, unfortunately, there are countries like England where I think they're trying to, or Northern Europe, where they're trying to ban the breeding of pugs because their ability to breathe comfortably and normally has been bred out of them to look a certain wrinkled, flat-faced way in a show ring. But nonetheless, people adore these breeds and own them, and it could be the Brussels Griffon, the Affenpinscher, any of these toy breeds who can obviously overheat, not obviously, but I assume they can overheat very quickly. They're just wee little things. What is the advice about how to manage them in the heat, but also is it dangerous for them to head dunk since their nose and their eyes and their mouth are all on a flat plane practically?
So that's a great question. We don't have any working brachycephalic dogs
That would be super.
because exactly that reason. They can't tolerate exercise in the heat in the same way that a dog that has a much more open airway and can pant more effectively and cool more effectively. So we have not looked at this in brachycephalic dogs. It is probably going to have the same impact, but we want to make sure that they can do it safely. They're putting their mouth and their nose in the water. Their eyes are going to go under anyway. So it should be something that they could be trained to do. I don't see any reason that they couldn't be trained to do it, but it is definitely something that we want to be very cautious. And I think that's where we even have to step back to a step further. And the dogs that can't manage their heat well, brachycephalic dogs, dogs that are overweight. And these are dogs that we have to be really cautious and really careful about the amount of activity that they are exposed to. We want to prevent them even from getting to that point of heat stress because they can't tolerate it. Their spectrum, their continuum from heat stress to heat stroke is much shorter. So it is a really, if you don't stop it at that point, they're gonna fall off the cliff. Where some of our other dogs can manage it a little bit better. Our athletic dogs, they can, just like athletic humans, you can train and tolerate higher temperatures with training.
On the other hand, those dogs that can mask it, if you will, for a while as the heat stress is increasing, they can appear like the top of a waterfall, right? Where it looks calm and then they crash. So they're
Exactly.
all at this risk. Now, what about puppies and senior dogs on the two ends of the age spectrum? Are they not more susceptible and more at risk for heat stroke or stress?
So it's a great question. And yeah, our senior dogs are have a little more self-preservation than the dogs you're talking about. Our working dogs will, or in some of our retrievers, they will chase a ball until they absolutely collapse. They don't realize it. So
That's
some of our senior dogs are a little more sensible that way. And so that might be an advantage. But they're also, their physiology as they age, they're less adaptable. Our puppies, what we know is that most dogs are about 60% water. Puppies are about 80% water. And so what we need to be aware that as they dehydrate and they overheat, they can definitely have issues. But to be honest, from a clinical perspective, tends to be our young adult dogs that are just playing
dry.
too hard. Yeah, too much motivation for whatever it is activity that they're doing, that they're not listening to what's going on. And what we want to do is we also want to educate owners about what are those signs that we can start looking for that our dog is starting to get a little bit on that heat stress end and pushing the limits. We want them to be aware. And I saw a photograph just the other day of a dog, and they thought it was a great dog, a great picture, but the dog's tongue was lolling out really long. It's, oh my gosh, the sign that that dog is overheating.
Yeah.
That's not a great picture. So we really want to think about what happens when they're starting to overheat. And one of the first things we see is that their tongue, it lengthens, it gets flat, it hangs down, because what it's acting is almost like a radiator trying to get rid of all of that heat. And so that's one of the first things. We also see that their eyes get squinty, their ears pull back, the lips pull back because they're panting really big. A lot of times their behavior will change. They might seek a shady area. They might not be as obedient as they usually are because they're getting a little woozy, but they still act like they want to play. And then all of a sudden they're like, boom, and they collapse and we're in big trouble.
That was going to be my question, was the tongue question. So if you're a dog and you pant and your tongue goes out the front, huh, but then it flops out the side and is longer, which happens with my young Vizsla, that looks to me like not even just stop playing, but let me go do something for you. And now that I know about the head dunking, would that be the time to do it?
Absolutely. And we can do it even before they get that hot because we can just keep them
Right.
cooler. So get them comfortable, getting used to it. Hey, I'm running. Oh, let me dunk my head for a little bit. Let's run some more. And keep that cooling going on. But definitely as we're starting to see those signs of that tongue coming out, the eyes changing, the ears changing, all of that, we had to stop the activity, cool them, and the head dunk is the way we really think that's a very effective way. Hosing them down is absolutely, if you do have a pool and they can get wet, that's great. The big thing about getting the whole dog wet, though, is you have to then have airflow. Because if you get the dog wet and then put them in a like a crate without enough airflow, that just becomes a steam bath.
Oh my God. And anyway, as you pointed out, it's the brain we're trying to protect. Nice if their armpits are cooler or even their paw pads, but it's the brain that matters. So this was my other question. Let's say you have a dog that maybe now that you've told me go fish, I'm going to try it with my old dog and my young dog and see if they'll do it. Neither of them is very water. The Weimaraner has no interest in being in the water, and the Vizsla only if he accidentally slips into a pond or something and he's totally startled. So, what about a hose? Why could I not run a hose over the top of their head and smush it around the nose and the mouth? Or is that 58 degrees that you don't know if it might be too cold?
I don't think it'll be too cold. It's more about how aversive it is. So
Uh,
if, and I have tried this with my dog before, and she gets really angry with me if I try and spray her down on the head with a hose. If we're just doing it as a kind of comfortable bath, she'll allow me to spray her head. But if you just come at a dog and spray him with a hose, they're going to go the other way, and that might be the last time that you can do that. And so one of the big things that we really like about this is it's a voluntary head dunk. It's a trained activity. The dog is choosing to do that and helping their own treatment, as opposed to us hosing them down and creating.
holding the collar, and the dog is like you said, pretty annoyed, finding it very unpleasant. When you talked about when you're really hot and liking to pour water over your head, I was reminded, and it's the reverse head dunk, but maybe not. When I did used to ride competitively, and in the hunter jumper world, it could be and was often over 100 degrees, and the human had to wear leather boots up to the knees and a wool jacket and a velveteen hat that held it everything. So I would just take off the hat and turn my own head upside down in a horse's water bucket. And then all the water would pour over me. And it was just that was the only thing that would work for cooling. So that's what you're talking about.
It's exactly what we're talking about.
So if you had a dog that you could get to like water not being with the sprayer, but drooling over their head from the hose coming mildly, would that be just as good? If
Just as good, we don't know. So we're currently doing a study where we're soaking a towel in
okay,
water and wrapping it around their head to see if we can simulate that cooling their head with water without having them engaged. We don't have the results yet. We're in the middle of that study because we know that it does take some time to train dogs to do this, but it's surprising how quick that we can train the dogs to do it. It really
I
doesn't
will,
take a lot of time. Some dogs are going to take longer, but again, you take your time step by step. Most dogs, we actually get to the full step of dunking their head within about 5 to 10 minutes. Some dogs that are less excited about water, a little more nervous, they might take a couple of sessions, but it is surprisingly not that difficult.
especially if you have a ready supply of string cheese.
String cheese is
Right.
magic.
It's a very good piece of advice. The work you're doing is so great because you do it for the dogs who are at genuine risk and risking their lives anyway to do the kind of work that people are asking of them. And but they're also helping all of us with just pet dogs. And I will say again to people, if I see you trying to jog with your dog in the heat, I want to pull my car over and go, dog abuse. Of course, I'm not going to do it. In my own vet clinic, I was there and somebody came in with the dog practically on a stretcher. They'd been hiking in 90-degree weather with an overweight dog who had laryngeal paralysis to begin with. So common sense by humans will probably go a long way. And I don't suppose you could do a study on common sense in humans, could you? I guess not.
I have no interest in doing that.
Yeah, people have to take responsibility for their own choices, but please make good choices for your dogs and walk them very early or very late and not on a boiling hot pavement. And if I see you doing it again, I will ask you to take your own shoes off, see how it feels to you. This is so great. I'm going to go stock up on some string cheese and see if Sky and Wanda will go for this. I love the idea. Thank you so much, Dr. Cindy Otto. And the American Kennel Club, did they fund this study?
So the American Kennel Club Canine Health Foundation funded our study where we did the voluntary head dunk, and they're funding our follow-up study that we're doing currently as well. So great thanks to them. Yes, absolutely.
They get a shout out because they do a lot of really good work along with the fun that people have at dog shows. Dr. Cindy Otto, I'll let you get back to it. Stock up on string cheese. Maybe you could get a sponsor that makes string cheese. Thank you so much for being here and all that you do for all the dogs.
Thank you so much, Tracie.